After years of submission, Mara is afraid and unsure about everything, especially her nephew, Jesus. Then he is chased off a cliff and Mara is forced into the unknown. At the same time, Joanna grapples with hiding her mixed race heritage or losing her family and community. Despite trauma, abuse, racism, and inequality, they join other women disciples. Will Jesus' opposition to the establishment endanger their lives? Forgotten Followers brings love and encouragement to anyone who has felt alone, rejected, or simply out of place. Instead of dismissing women of the Gospels as unimportant, I lift them up as empowered and vibrant characters. Whether evangelical or ex-evangelical, atheist, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, deconstructing or doubting, readers can find yourself in this historical fiction, the first novel in my Broken to Bold series.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever it is you're joining us today, my name is Tyler Tavares, and I'm the pastor, one of the pastors of a church in Cobourg, Ontario, and I'm joined today and very excited to be talking with Elaine Kelly. Elaine, it's great to have you here. You are the author of a book that is forthcoming at the time of this recording. It's coming out August 1st, I believe.
Late August, yeah.
Late August, okay. And it's called Forgotten Followers, From Broken to Bold. And today we're going to be talking a lot about this book. It's going to be a fascinating conversation that we have. I've been very thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with Elaine about this. And so we'll dig a little bit into the book here in just a moment, and we'll get a little bit of even your own background as you think about and as you share with us your connection, your personal connection with the book itself, maybe with the characters in the novel and in the biblical story. But let me share just with those who are watching a bit of how we got connected, because it's a bit of a neat story.
Yeah.
So your daughter actually goes to our church here in Cobourg. She moved here not too long ago, and she got connected, and you were here visiting and heard that actually we as a church are wrestling through something and talking through something that a lot of churches either have historically talked through or they're going to be talking through it in the future. And it's an important topic. It's all about women in leadership, women in ministry. And anybody who's, a church who takes the Bible maybe seriously, has some measure of thinking about the Bible authoritatively, they're going to look at the Bible and wonder about some of what's said in the Bible around women, right? And there are some verses in there that can be tough to wrestle with. And so you were here and you were at Cobourg Alliance as we were sharing that we are kind of initiating some of that conversation as a church. And we're actually going to be voting as a church a little bit later on this year around what it means for women to be in leadership. And so you were here, you kind of heard that, and you said, hey, actually, I've written something, a historical fiction that has to do with women in the first century. And so one thing led to another, and here we are, and we're talking about your book, and this is why I'm so excited about it, because we as a church are actually in the midst of this. And so we'll spend most of our time actually digging into Elaine's book, and we'll talk a little bit as well about what we as churches and as people, what women can do, and what advice Elaine might have for all of us as we think through and wrestle through some of these things as well. So, Elaine, again, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure, absolutely. I'm so excited to talk about this topic with you.
Well, thank you. And can you start to share by sharing with us a little bit of your own journey and your journey in terms of your connection with this book? Why create a historical fiction in the first century that centers around women, who experience many things that are maybe different than what men would experience, or even some women today, not all, but some.
So most of my career was in financial planning, so that's where I was at. And then I was easing back to part-time in my final year before I retired a year ago. And in that time where I was just part-time, it was also the same time of COVID. And so I was spending some time just exploring things in the Bible and reading and watching a lot of podcasts or online sermons. And the more I explored, the more I had more questions. So one of the ones that I explored a lot was Joanna, because I was a financial advisor for 30 years. And I was very excited to find out that it was women who supported Jesus' ministry and supported the disciples as they traveled and worked. So in Luke 8:1-3, it mentions Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Susanna and many other women who were financial supporters of Jesus and his work and his disciples, and that they had all been healed and were financial supporters. And I learned that being a financial supporter is the typical role of a disciple. So I thought, I want to find out what other women were disciples. And I also, wanted to see who was an apostle, being one who Jesus commissions or sends out. And of course, that's where the woman at the well is, right at the early part of Jesus' ministry, authorized to go and spread the word. I have 3 daughters. My husband and I have 3 daughters. And so all through their childhood, I tried to encourage them to explore, to ask questions, to find their calling and their gifts. And so I would always look for stories that they could model in the Gospels as well. And one of those stories that really kind of annoyed me in the little children's picture book they had when they were little was a picture of the Clopas and the disciple on the road to Emmaus. And I actually went in and recolored the second person to show that it was the woman, his wife, with him. And I discovered in the last couple of years that I'm not the only one that thinks that may have been his wife when they went to their home to eat dinner after they had been to the festival together. So I did a lot of exploring on who was this possible disciple and who was Mary of Clopas. And so looking for female models of followers, disciples, patrons, disciples, and apostles that are women.
That's great. So it's your financial background that kind of got you connected a little bit. It's a bit of, your retirement, you retired, you had some time, the pandemic, and then sort of a little bit of even that personal connection with your 3 daughters as you were thinking about, their background, their upbringing, what you read in some of these stories, and maybe even some frustration that emerged as you saw some of those things in that book, ready to just maybe rewrite a little bit of that as you sort of saw it.
Well, imagine, nothing in the Bible says that companion was male. So we could have equally imagined it as male or female. And I think that a lot of times in the gospel stories, we imagine it as a male when it could have been either male or female. The language does not actually say whether it's male or female. And because of our English language being like male being the plural, we quite often have included male ideas when it may not be.
It's good. Yeah. So that's interesting. Now, can you share with us a little bit about what you want to draw out of this book? What are some of the main themes that you explore in the book? And we'll get to the characters in a second as well, and you'll get to deep dive into those characters. And maybe they're integrated. Maybe those things are sort of the same question. But what do you hope to draw out, and who maybe do you hope to influence through the writing of this? Yeah.
So the big ideas are to, hopefully this book is an inspiration to you and to you to actually explore the Bible and what it actually might say as opposed to what you thought it said, an inspiration. And I also want it to empower people, empower women in particular to realize that they can see themselves and to see that Jesus lifted up women. It's like in Mary's song of praise, the Magnificat, Jesus comes to lift up people who are lowly. And I see that as Jesus lifting up the women. And so I see it as an empowerment and an inspiration. As far as who would read the book, I think there are a lot of people, men and women, who are disappointed with certain trends in the church right now. The main themes of the book are abuse and racism, which are very resonant and relevant today. And some of the abuse seems to be coming from the idea that women are there for men to use and that women are there to serve silently and submissively. And this actually has taken to the extreme. It can be harmful.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing. What I'm hearing is a couple of the key themes have to do with abuse. They have to do with racism, drawing some of that out through the lens of women in the first century.
That's exactly
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So speaking, to that point, and maybe before we get to the key characters, this is different in that it is a historical fiction, right? And so can you help us understand a little bit, if maybe you're watching and you've not yourself read through historical fiction, before. How do we access the best ways to read historical fiction?
Okay.
Yeah.
So access is actually the key. The reason I wanted to do it in a fiction or in a story is to make it accessible. There are a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, that are not going to read a thick academic textbook. They might not know the language that's being used by the writers. I find that a fiction makes a concept more accessible to the general population. And I also feel that a novel is like a parable. So you have a fictional story with truths that are coming out in the story. So I view my novel as a parable in that way.
That's great. I love that. And Jesus, of course, teaches it, many, many times through parable. So it's a great way to sort of access the heart. And we talked a little bit about accessing the heart, right? Sort of the feeling that comes alongside something, not just the mind, but sort of the soul. Do you want to maybe touch on that just a bit?
We did just before we came on talk about how a lot of the nonfiction books that have, proven with theology and translations and explanations why women and men are equal, they might affect your thinking, but they won't necessarily affect your heart. And I think maybe that's why Jesus used parables. One of the reasons that a story impacts your heart. So in my world as a financial advisor, life insurance sales and investment sales, we could talk a lot about concepts, but people didn't really take action until they felt a need to, in their heart, okay, this strategy or this action is going to help my family and it's going to make me feel secure and have peace of mind. So it's as they had a saying that stories sell. So facts tell, stories sell. Yes. And I think the idea of biblical equality is more accessible and more going to be more emotional and connected with a story.
That's great. That's great. So let's dig into the characters a little bit. Now, so, there are both male and female characters that are in this story. And so, of course, Jesus, is a key figure in this story. But if you could talk specifically about the key women, and I'm curious about, a couple things. One is why these particular women, you chose specific women to draw out a little bit more. So why those women, and what's their connection in the biblical account sort of itself? Yeah.
So the women I'm talking about in the novel are all in the 4 Gospels and the first 2 chapters of Acts. I only go as far as that in this novel. And my goal was to see how Jesus interacted with those women. And as it turns out, he does empower them. So writing fiction, I actually had to go back and rewrite this book many times over the last year and a half or so because I would discover new writing techniques to make it more impactful and powerful. So I decided to limit myself to 2 points of view, Mara and Joanna. So because there's about 5 or 6 Marys in the Gospels, I call Mary of Clopas Mara just as a simplicity when we're telling the story. So the one main character is Mara, or Mary of Clopas. And, this is where fiction comes in. The fiction idea being that she had a very authoritarian father who was in fact physically abusive, and she went to a school where the teacher was abusive. And so when we meet her, she's already over 30 and she's got a few children, but she is overcoming that trauma. And so that involved me looking at women who have overcome trauma, either spiritual abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and how they overcome it, and trying to show step by step through the novel the different things that Mara learns in becoming healthy and whole.
That's good. Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
And the effect of the trauma on her, of course, is that she is extremely doubtful. So anybody who is doubting the church or doubting God can relate to Mara. If you're deconstructing or if you have been hurt by the church, you will relate to Mara. And then the other main character is Joanna. In fact, Joanna, she's only mentioned a couple times in the Gospels. It's possible that she was the granddaughter of Theophilus, to whom Luke addresses both the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. Now, there's controversy about that, but I decided to accept that tradition, that she was raised by her grandfather, who is a chief priest and a teacher of the law, and opposed to Jesus, because Jesus is upsetting the establishment. And I just for the fiction part of it, because I wanted to talk about racism and how Jesus reached out to people of other races and accepted people of other ethnicities, I imagined that she was mixed race, and he had a father who was Greek and was ostracized because he wasn't Jewish.
So those are the two key characters in the novel. There are some others as well, right? I mean, I think we were talking, you have 12 sort of women disciples,
That's exactly right?
Yeah. So maybe
So-
you don't have to touch on every character, of course, but what role do these other women play along the way?
Right. So they do end up following Jesus together for companionship and also for safety, because women could not travel. They were under a lot of restrictions for traveling on their own. Mara, her main connection was with Jesus's mother, Mary, who I'm calling Maria, just for simplicity. So Maria, you know the story where Jesus is thrown out of Nazareth because he couldn't do miracles there, or not very many, because people in his hometown didn't believe in him. And that's where this novel starts. The people throw him out. I assume or imagine that they also threw out his mother, because his mother was loyal to Jesus. And so they threw out his mother and Jesus from Nazareth, and Mara went to take care of her sister-in-law, because historians do say that Joseph's brother was Clopas, or called Alphaeus in another language. Clopas and Alphaeus can be the same name. So I went with that assumption. And so Mara is a sister-in-law to Maria. Mara is the aunt of Jesus.
Yeah, wonderful. So, and you chose 12 probably for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it actually did just kind of fit in. I was focusing on a number of women, and I thought, to me, it makes sense to say, what if there were at least 12 women that were chosen and called by Jesus? So I have Mara and her sister-in-law, Maria, who is the mother of Jesus. They go to Capernaum because they're not welcome any longer in Nazareth. In Capernaum, they meet Peter's wife, who is not named in the Bible, but historians call her Perpetua.
Okay, yeah.
And then we also have the mother of James and John, who is married to Zebedee, whom history calls Salome. So we have those that are in Capernaum, and of course, nearby Bethesda is where Philip is from, and church tradition has his sister being Mariamne. She's not named in the Bible, but there are many places where it says many women were there, and history has records of Mariamne becoming an apostle after Jesus' resurrection. So that's kind of the group of women who are not very rich, and they're from that Capernaum kind of area. Then we have Joanna, who's the wife of Chuza, who he works for King or Tetrarch Herod Antipas. So she's got wealth and position and education, was raised by the best teachers, tutored through her grandfather. And then she's with Mary Magdalene, who of course many people are familiar with, but Mary Magdalene has been maligned or insulted through the years, called a prostitute, which is not biblical. And she was in fact a disciple and an apostle, a healer, healed by Jesus. So I tried to lift up Mary Magdalene as an honored disciple, and also Susanna, who's mentioned as a financial supporter and patron. And so that's kind of the essential group. And then I have Fotini, who's the woman at the well. Mary and Martha are an interesting pair of sisters, traditionally viewed as the sisters of Lazarus. And she actually is called the master of the house. Lazarus is not the master of the house. Lazarus is not verbal in the Bible. So could be a variety of reasons for that. I actually have used one of the theories about Lazarus, not widely used, but one of the theories is that he has Down syndrome. That's shortened his life expectancy. He's well loved but nonverbal, and dies young, and then Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. So this is one theory. I'm not saying it's fact. Of course, it's a fiction, but it shows that God and Jesus reach out to those who are not able-bodied, because it's about equality of persons, regardless of gender, but also regardless of ability, right? Yes. And regardless of anything is what I'm trying to say with the novel. And there are a number of places where Martha is portrayed as serving, but in fact, if you look at very ancient translations, it says Martha is ministering. So I think she might be serving as in a minister serving Eucharist, not serving as in a housemaid. So there's different views of the same story.
It's great. So many characters that you actually, you sort of bring to life through writing this. So this might be a hard question to answer, but is there a character that you resonated most with? Kind of throughout the whole, and maybe not, but is there one as you
It would
wrote?
probably be Mara. Like
would be
Mara
Mara,
has
okay.
more of the character development than the others. She's more deeply developed. I'm not saying I'm like Mara, but there are some things about her that resonate. I sometimes listen to the negative and ignore the positive, which is what Mara does. And it takes some effort to learn to take the compliment and ignore the negative, and to believe in yourself, and to believe that you're chosen, and to believe that God loves you.
It's good.
Regardless.
It's good. It's good. It's great. And so I can see that there's a lot that is kind of in you that has come out in this novel, right? You're deeply connected with the characters in this story. So as you kind of went through the process of researching for this book, was there anything in particular that stood out to you when it came to how women were viewed in the first century? Anything sort of new that came to mind?
So many things that were new. Like I spent quite a bit of time on the section on Matthew 19, where it talks about divorce and the man being accountable to upholding his vows. Whereas they were just asking Jesus, can I write a divorce certificate anytime in order to trap Jesus? It turned out Jesus was telling men to be accountable to their vows, and to be faithful. So I spent quite a bit of time looking at actually a book and a blog called The Life-Saving Divorce when it came to that chapter. And then I spent quite a bit of time on the section on the Sermon on the Mount with Turn the Other Cheek, because that has actually been used against women to continue in abusive situations. So I looked at a number of bloggers who talked about women in abusive marriages and how you can still seek shelter. It's okay to leave and seek shelter. And so there were some very big themes there about I have characters, women in this novel, who do get divorced or other things happen, and they do get married, but it was because people made an agreement about who they were supposed to marry. So that comes through quite a bit. I also had a theory about why Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were not married, because it was very unusual at that time. And there was a section of Jews that were called Essenes, who believed in remaining celibate for their whole life and being caretakers and just studying theology and medicine. So I portray Martha, Mary, and Lazarus as Essenes.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And Mary, she's lifted up. She's told, Jesus says, yes, she made the right decision to sit at my feet and be a disciple in the posture of a disciple. But later, when she anoints him a few days before his death, I have Mary anointing his head with oil in the same way that a prophet anoints a king. Because I believe she did believe what he had predicted repeatedly by that point, that he was going to die, but maybe she thought that he would come to life like her brother Lazarus had.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like there's a lot to be learned, from what happened, in the first century, and how women sort of experienced life in sort of the first century. And so did your research actually change how you viewed, a woman's role in the Bible? So did it change from beginning to end, or did you learn some new things, and did it reinforce some of what you had already thought? How did you experience that along the way?
Well, it is true that I did think of women and men being equals from prior to reading it. So it was more a surprise to see how much Jesus had lifted up women and turned ideas upside down. So this book, as I say, doesn't address the letters of Paul or the old, as far as that goes. But if you see how Jesus treated the women, then you have to kind of fit the rest of the New Testament into what Jesus is telling us about his worldview. And what I also point out is that Mara is saying, if Jesus turns the world upside down, would it be like the good old days when, in the Old Testament, when women were, prophets and military leaders and judges and, and queens and influencers. So there is a history of strong women in the Old Testament.
Yes, interesting. Now, As you are writing, I don't know, you'll have to tell me as an author, as you think about what you're writing and you're thinking about who you want to write this to. I could imagine that at least, with a topic like this, you might be thinking about the church, the church broadly speaking, maybe not your particular church, but the church in general. So is there a message for the church that you sort of hope to convey through your writing?
I do hope to convey that women and men and people of all abilities and that the people of all stripes are equal. That's what I basically want to say. And that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I do respect, I view myself as an ecumenical Christian, which to me just means that if you say with your mouth that you declare Jesus is Lord and you act like, you're living for Jesus, then I believe you're a Christian. So regardless of what denomination you go to, I have friends that I respect in many different denominations. And so I'm not out to criticize people. I don't have enemies in any church. I just think that people, if they haven't viewed women and men as equals before, maybe they should look at some things, some stories and teachings from a different point of view, and then revisit the Bible to see again if their original view is still what they think
Still holds. Yeah. Well, that's great. And go ahead.
My idea is not to change anybody's mind or to preach. My idea is to tell a story and let people decide for themselves who they think Jesus is. So over and over again, Jesus asked his followers, who do you say that I am? And my book finishes with, who do you think that I am? So I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm not a theologian. I'm just telling what the women saw and heard and experienced, and then the reader can decide.
Mm-hmm. It's great, Elaine. I love it. And what advice would you give maybe to people who are wrestling with change? So people, churches, who maybe they come out of, a different kind of viewpoint, and they would read something like this and they would have to actually sort of wrestle through it. So do you have advice for anyone like that? Yeah.
It is going to be hard. I'm in a number of Facebook groups where they're wrestling with these kinds of ideas, where they're new to the idea of egalitarianism and where they don't know what kind of arguments there could be, and the Bible doesn't seem. So I understand that. You just have to explore with an open mind. If you go about looking for proof text to promote your point of view, it will just make our faith more divided and more broken and a worse witness to the world. So I would rather us not pull out proof text to prove our point of view. I would rather talk openly about, what could this mean and what could that mean? And then hopefully we as a body of believers can work together for the good of the body of believers.
It's great. I love it, Elaine. And what about for women specifically? As you think about this, is there any advice to women specifically as they wrestle with some of these? Because you talk about some pretty intense themes in here, right?
Yeah, there are some themes. Yeah. So if a woman feels that she has no voice, if she feels that she is not respected, then I think she has to get out of that situation and go to a place where she is respected and where people do listen to her. Especially, I believe all human beings are made in God's image and have God's gifts and reflect God's personality and have a unique calling, not by gender, but by your personality traits. So I would just encourage women to know that they are co-heirs with Jesus, co-heirs with men, and that God treats us equally. And if you are threatened, you need to get an advocate who can help you to perceive things in a different way so that you can get the safety that you need.
Well, thank you, Elaine. Maybe one final question when it comes to advice. So what about advice for pastors? Pastors are in roles where they actually, it's a position of influence, in a local church, and depending on sort of what you do, you've got a wide range of folks that you are trying to minister to and come alongside, and pastors themselves have their own perspective on things. And so is there any advice you'd give to pastors?
Yeah, I do think it's hard for you in a pastor's role, particularly if you are required to speak or preach according to the confession of your church or the doctrine of your church, then you sometimes can't say your own personal feelings, and sometimes pastors are restricted in expressing any kind of doubt or change of mind. All I would say is I think it's fantastic for you to have this series that you're having, so you have people from different perspectives. You're opening up the world to people that might have a long history entrenched in one way of thinking, but if they can have a series of conversations, and I know another church in my town that's done that, a series of conversations where the pastor is opening up alternate ways of looking at things, and then again, it's up to each person, but the idea of the novel is to reach the heart as opposed to the mind. But a series of conversations where everything is on the table, I think is the only thing you can do, where people can feel for themselves what is right.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. Now, this book is coming out late August, right? But this isn't the last book in the series, from what I understand.
No,
you have plans for more. So will you share a little bit about that? Yeah.
Yeah. So this book is quite full of a lot of themes, but it really only covers the 4 Gospels up to the 2nd chapter of Acts, where, of course, Peter converts 3,000 people. And then those people from Pentecost go all around back to Rome, start different churches. And then, of course, we have the book of Acts. So the next book hopefully in my series, we'll have, 2 main characters. I'm going with the theory that Joanna, which is a Greek or Hebrew, which is a Hebrew name, she starts using the Latin version of her name, which is Junia, and she is graded as an apostle. Paul calls Junia an apostle, that's an outstanding apostle in Romans 16. And then the other main character will be her good friend from the first novel, which is Susanna. And I have her as, of course, Philip the Evangelist is in Caesarea with 4 unmarried prophesying daughters, but there's no mention of his wife. So I have Susanna married to Philip the Evangelist. Okay. And so we have Paul visiting Philip and Susanna. We have Junia being in prison with Paul. We have a number of things happening there.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and it goes through all the women in those books. There's Priscilla and Aquila, who are in Corinth, in Ephesus, and in Rome, and there are a number of other women. There's Chloe in Corinth, and there's Phoebe in Centura. So there's a number of women that are named in Acts and Corinthians and Romans that will be in that book.
Book 2. And when do you have an anticipated release date? Who knows?
It'll be a year. Yeah, I ended up rewriting this book over and over again. So we will see. Who knows?
But well, that's wonderful. Now we've covered a lot of ground today as we've sort of explored some of your book and a little bit of your own background. Is there anything else that maybe we've missed that you'd like people to know about the book?
Just, I'm very excited about it. I hope that it will be accessible to people. I hope that it'll make people think and consider biblical equality. And if you do read it, I could, because I'm an independent writer, I could really benefit from having online reviews once you get the book.
Well, that's great. And, along those lines, if someone wanted to find out more about you and about your writing, where do they go? Where can they go online?
Yeah, so I have used the name Elaine Kelly Author with just the American spelling of author. So Elaine Kelly Author on Facebook page, Instagram, or Twitter. It'll be Elaine Kelly with an author. There, in some cases, there's an underscore between the 3 words, but if you look Elaine Kelly Author on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook page, then you can follow me that way.
Great, and we'll make that available through the video. We'll have kind of a little tag up here, so if you look maybe right now, you're going to find it on the video screen. So feel free, if you want to check out Elaine Kelly and all of her work, then go there. Yeah, did you have
one last thing?
Yes,
I do have a website. It's called elainekelly.ca. And so when I discover new things in my research, I usually write a blog on elainekelly.ca. And also, if you wanted the latest updates of the book, you can go there and contact me. Some of my research I've put together also in a little card book, which I'm going to be making available soon. And I'm also preparing an interactive study guide for the novel.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Elaine. It has been an absolute pleasure having you today and discovering a little bit more about this book, which is called Forgotten Followers From Broken to Bold. Elaine, thank you so much. And if you want to find out more about Elaine, again, go to her website, follow her on social, send her a review if you've read the book. If you're watching this and it's before late August of 2022, then you only have a little bit of time left before you're going to be able to access that book. If after, then it should be available for you. So go to her website and check it out. Elaine, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, Tyler.
Gladly.
Appreciate it.